question. The question is this: as we move from marriage into the topic of parenting, okay, so there's a transition over here. We started out, and it's a loop, really, because we started out as children, and we grew up, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, that journey that we all took. And from there, we grew up to be the journey, and we ended up being adults. We got married, those of us who have already. And now we're at a point where we have our own children. So now the question is, the sound is low. Maybe I should switch to the, first of all, is it better now? Is this better? Just let me know. Otherwise, I'll switch to the clip if that's going to make it easier. Okay, let me give this a shot over here. If this is easier, we'll do it this way. Hang on, here we go. That goes here. That can go there. There. And this can come here. Okay. How does that sound? Does the sound better? Please let me know either way. Okay, so we continue. Yes, sounds better. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. Thanks for the input. Okay, so basically, this is a journey that's a loop. All right? So we entered someone else's journey when we were children, and they needed to raise us. And now, at some point, we are continuing that loop, and we are going to now get into that in our part. Okay, so we're going to be able to look at it from both sides. And I think that's a very important part of what we're doing over here, is that we can look at things from different perspectives. We're not stuck only in our personal perspective. And that's very important, okay? Speaking of perspectives, anyone who's ever done anything about coaching, and this could even come in handy in many other parts of your existence, and that is to realize that there are basically three perspectives. There's my perspective, there's your perspective, and then there's what's known as the observer perspective. All right, we used to call it the fly on the wall, and now we can call it the drone effect, sort of. So when you are living something, when you're going through a specific situation, you're seeing it through your eyes, right? So it's right there, and you're seeing it, you're looking at it. And then there's sometimes where you see something through another person's eyes, or at least your empathy, your sympathy for what's going on through the other person's eyes. And we see that very often when a person is walking down the street and they fall, or slip, or besonders wissen, right? And we cringe. Oy. We're seeing it from their perspective, right? Then there's another perspective. And this is very important, because Ein Chuvish Atzman Mibaisa Asidim is what Chazal taught us. That a person can't take himself out of his situation. We need help, right? So we need someone else. Yet, to the extent that that someone else is seeing it through our eyes, they can also get caught up in the actual problem that we're in. So that's why, as coaches, as helpers, as parents, as mechanchim, very often it's not enough to see it through the eyes of the child, or of your spouse, or your partner, or the other person, or your client, depending on what the situation is. And it's not enough that you definitely can't see it through your eyes, because your eyes, you're lacking in the perspective of really feeling what's going on by the other person. So you put yourself in their eyes, you see it through their eyes, but now you can see it so heavily, and this happens very often. When you truly empathize with somebody on a very deep level, you can lose your capacity to be helpful, because you're so caught up in their pain, which sometimes is what they need, by the way. Sometimes all someone else who's in pain needs is someone to just sit down with them in their pain and just share it with them as if they were one. And that's so healing. And yet, from that perspective, it's very possible that the same way they couldn't come up with the solution to their problem, neither will the person who's sitting with them. So we need another perspective. Okay? And you can try this if you like, but regardless of how it works, it's still something that we're aware of. So wherever you are right now, or unless you're driving, please don't close your eyes ever while you're driving. But if you're not driving, you're in a comfortable place and you close your eyes for a moment and you imagine yourself a few moments ago coming to where you are. Just imagine yourself coming from wherever you were to where you are, and if you're on a computer or a phone, sitting down, standing up, setting yourself up with a drink or whatever it is, and just imagine yourself doing that. Okay, and as soon as you're done imagining yourself doing that, open your eyes and ask yourself, where was the camera to this scene that you just saw, that you just imagined? Was it like this? Was it VR perspective? You were seeing it this way? Or were you seeing yourself do it? From either here, or some of you may be here, but somewhere out here would be the camera, if you had to place it. There seems to be a part of our nefesh. I'm not explaining this, I'm not claiming it, I'm just describing something that I've experienced and others have as well. It could be that there are studies done about it, where we seem to have some part of us that's always out here watching us, and that we close our eyes, we can tap into, because otherwise, where did that come from, where did it go, right? So that perspective. But that perspective is the perspective from which we need to see things in order to be helpful. Anytime you want to be able to be helpful for a situation, you can't see it through your eyes, you can't see it through the other person's eyes, except to the extent that you want to just be there with them, for them, which is great, we said. Yet in order to be helpful, you have to be able to see the big picture. And we use this language. We say, let's back up a little bit and see it from a different perspective, right? From a different side, from a different angle. Angle is a word that we would use for perspective. Because that's so important. Because in order to solve something, and this is including in your own life, if you gain this skill to be able to, even when you're the one who's in it, sort of pull back the camera and go into drone perspective, fly on the wall perspective. They actually say that I've been thinking about this for years. I wish I would do this. Obviously, not enough. But there's a therapy. There are therapists that what they do is they come into the house, they wire up cameras, and they leave, and they let those cameras roll and record. And believe it or not, even though we all think that, if we have cameras watching, the Levai Shelo Yadani Yudam, right? But after a while, we get used to that like everything else in life, and very shortly we revert to our old behaviors. And they just let those cameras roll, and then they take the recordings from those cameras, they just splice them up to get out all the empty time and all the stuff that's not interesting, and they edit together a reel of just how the people act. And there are studies that claim that when people just see themselves acting the way that they act, they're very often so disgusted that they just change without needing any more therapy. Obviously, they definitely need more therapy. But saying that that's a very important part of the therapeutic process is that we see ourselves the way we really are, the way we really act. And again, that's part of, if we can adapt, if we can somehow train ourselves, that instead of getting caught up in something, in the moment, in the thing, in ourselves, we can pull back and sort of have that drone effect. If we could create that for ourselves, I believe that could be very helpful in many, many instances in our lives, especially in relationships and parenting, which is what we're here to talk about today. Okay, so we're here to talk about the parenting paradox, which we began with, is that we're all born children, and eventually we have children, and all the things that we didn't like that they should do to us as children, we seem to end up doing to our children. For all the best reasons, and all the best intentions. And yet, we're just raising more children that are going to grow up not liking the way they're being raised. And I heard a great line once that said that while all parents are expecting gratitude, a thank you, all children are waiting for an apology. Right? So l'chayra, we don't want to do that. Now, obviously, whatever I'm saying, if in any way, anything I say, goes against your own common sense, if it goes against your version of halacha, if it goes against anything that's scientific or otherwise, then definitely ignore it and just take it as a metaphor for things that we talk about, and we need to have words to discuss them. Okay? I'm not here to say this is this and this is the way, this is the only way. I'm coming to offer another perspective. I'm coming to say that, hey, why does it have to be this way? Maybe, possibly, it could maybe be another way or a better way. And if that other way, better way works better for you, that's great. And if it doesn't, that's fine too. Okay? So let's start. The philosophers of all the different types of philosophies, and including, and obviously for us especially, the Yiddish philosophers, and we don't always refer to them as such, but under different circumstances it can be, describe the parts of every human being, of the nefesh, as that of a horse and a rider. Okay? And I'd like to just explore that for a little bit today as we move into the coming weeks, deeper and deeper understandings of the parental-child relationship, which we began as children and we become parents to children, and we want to be able to make sense of all of it. We want to be able to use our childhood to feed into our parenting, and yet we want to use that parenting to raise healthy children of Hashem. Okay? So the way that we describe the two parts, and there are more parts, there are multiple parts, you know, Naranchai, right? Nefesh, Riach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida, which is for a whole different form, a whole different class. And yet we know that there are parts. We know that in the different sciences they're referred to, regardless of whether or not they've proven or they all agree what it means. We have the conscious and the subconscious. We all know that in the esoteric languages we discuss the masculine and the feminine, okay, and that's something that we're going to talk about. Says Omer B'Yidom Arav, Kol Ma Shebura Kodesh Baruch Hu Ba'aluma Zuchar Nekai V'Baram Shenemar Zuchar Nekai V'Baram. So everything is male and female, which we know is not male and female. Right? Is my chair a male or a female? But it's masculine or feminine, with the masculine energy having its job and the feminine energy having its job. Okay, so we're going to touch on a bunch of things, but ultimately what we're trying to figure out is, how can I be a better spouse? How can I be a better me? How can I be a better role model? How can I be a better parent? That's basically the question. And anyone who doesn't have that question, maybe there's a different class that you want to go take now, maybe a little yoga or a little exercise. But if these are things that you think to yourself, you know, I'd really like to be a better me. I'd really like to be a better spouse. I'd really like to be a better parent. Then come, let's unpack it. All right? Especially want to thank the participants who come here, some of you week after week, Tuesdays at 4, and hopefully you're getting the maximum value that you can. And if there's any way that we can bring you more value, just reach out and let us know. And if you really want to rock and roll, come join a group. Yes, it'll cost you a little something, but it'll cost you just enough that it should be a job fameful, so that you're committed to the process. Otherwise, you're welcome to continue joining us here Tuesdays at 4 for as long as we keep on doing this, Mir Hashem. And we're so happy to have you here. So, as we said, the relationship between the parts, all right? We're focusing on two. There's the horse, which is referred to as the body, right? And then there's the rider, which you could refer to as the neshama, you could refer to as the soul. There are so many different ways that you could refer to the different parts. But let's first focus on the horse, all right? What does a horse need or want? All a horse needs or wants is to eat, drink, sleep, run around, and procreate, have other horses. That's it. That's more or less what a horse wants to do. Horses don't have destinations, right? Horse gets up in the morning, doesn't say to himself, you know, I'm thinking of going to Leipzig. How many hours does it take? What am I going to do when I get there? Horse gets up in the morning, and in his stall, right, he runs from one side to the other side. Whoo, you think he's on his way, somebody's going to end up far away. Next thing you know, he gets to the end, he just turns around and runs right back. No destination. No rhyme or reason. No obvious rhyme or reason. Sure, it makes sense to the horse. And along comes a rider. Now, what's the rider's job? Well, the rider needs the horse to get to his destination, which by default says that a rider, by default, has to have a destination. That's what a rider is. We know in our culture there's such a thing as just driving around in circles and not going anywhere, but we're obviously talking about sane people, right? So a rider has a destination. That's one of the intrinsic rules of a rider. Okay, not that the horse really cares, definitely not at first, and we'll get into that in a second, but a rider, by definition, has a destination. The rider now figures that with the horse, he or she can get to their destination faster, better, right, without having to extend as much energy, personal energy, and therefore it's a good idea to use the horse. Yet here's the thing. The first part of the paradox. If you choose a weak little horse that you can control, it might take you many more hours or maybe even days to get to where you're going. So you're going to go for a nice, big, fat horse, a horse that can gallop, a horse that can carry a ton, and that's the horse you're going to use. But guess what? If the horse is that big and that strong and you're maybe a little scrawny little rider, you better watch out because you might not be able to control that horse. So you want to find a horse that's going to work for you, okay? So it has to be not too scrawny that it's going to take you 100 years to get to your destination. And at the same time, you don't want to take one that's out of your control. And we'll understand in a moment where this even comes into consideration, because we do not really get to control which body we get from Hashem, right? So this is sort of the body I got, that's the body you got, and we got to live with it. So we're obviously using this metaphorically, and we're going to explain how in a moment. So we have this horse and we have the rider. The rider has a destination, and the horse is going to carry the rider. Gladly and happily, that's how Hashem created the world. The horse is happy to do this. Yet here's the thing. From the moment that the rider gains control over the horse, it now becomes the rider's job to take care of the horse and make sure that the horse eats, sleeps, drinks, runs around, and procreates. That's the job. The rider now gained an achrayus, a responsibility to the horse, because if the horse is now under my control, the horse is taking me to where I want to go to, together with that comes a responsibility to take care of the horse moving forward. Agree or disagree? Or agree or agree. Right? So this is part and parcel of the relationship between the horse and the rider. Alright? Now, in our personal relationship with ourselves, we have that same relationship. So, who am I? Right? You go to any Kiruv class. This is one of the first things they're going to talk about. Who are you? Are you this? Is this me? The body? The flesh? The blood? The veins? The heart? The gush? The brain? My eyeballs? Who am I? Or is there a me? Is there a deeper me that's running all of this, that's deciding all of this, that's choosing all of this, and that's having this journey, using this body as a vehicle? Because the neshama soul, again, whatever you want to call it, conscious, subconsciousness, needs a physical vehicle in order to connect to the physical world, in order to be able to interact with the physical world. And that's what we're doing. And yet, we have to understand that that's the way it needs to work. So in reality, when a person is brushing their teeth, they shouldn't consider that they're brushing their teeth. They have to think that I'm brushing my horse's teeth. Right? I'm not getting into bed, getting out of bed. I'm putting my horse into bed. I'm taking my horse out of bed. I have a horse. And the horse takes care of me. The horse carries me wherever I want to go all day. Sits and stands and eats and drinks and does all the things that I want it to do. Picks things up and everything. Baruch Hashem, everything's working amazingly. And I hope that's by you as well. So my horse is taking care of me, and I'm taking care of my horse, as long as I don't confuse the two. And here's where this gets interesting. Because once you understand and realize that there's a relationship going on between the horse and the rider, each one of them providing the other one with different services that the other one needs. The horse gets to be taken care of, which has got to be nice. And the rider gets to use the horse to get to his or her destinations, which has definitely got to be nice. And yet there's an interaction between the two. And when one is taking care of the other, or the other is being taken care of, the relationship keeps on shifting. And these are some of the things that we need to understand in order to have better relationships with ourselves, with our spouse, and with our children. Okay? So, using the horse and rider metaphor, and that's what we're going to stick to today, and then we're going to expand on it in the coming weeks. But just for today, using the horse and rider metaphor, when I could get such trouble for saying what I'm about to say, so I want to be very clear that, God forbid, I don't mean this in any way literally, all right? And if there's anybody out there who disagrees with me, the more violently you disagree with me, the more I agree with you that you should violently disagree with this. Yet as a metaphor that's been used by Chazal and by others throughout history, when life still made sense. When men were men and women were women and adults were adults and children were children and it wasn't all mixed up and you just pick and choose whatever you want to be. God bless whoever was able to do that as well. A lot of things become confusing when we attempt to do that. And again, I'm not talking about anybody's personal choices. I'm just talking about the esoteric model in order to be able to use this model to understand ourselves and our experience better. Okay? Having said that, in a marriage, although no woman in the world will ever agree to be referred to as a horse, because she's not, that's for sure. Yet in the relationship between the horse and the rider, any woman I've ever asked, in the relationship with your husband, if one of you was the horse and the other was the rider, meaning the rider has a vision, has a destination, and the horse takes care of whatever has to be taken care of in order to help the rider get to his or her destination, and together with that, the rider now has a responsibility to take care of all of the needs of the horse. Which would you prefer? And so far, this is not a scientific study, it's only my personal experience, but so far, besides those few times when I was afraid I'd get a punch in the nose, which Baruch Hashem never happened, the response has always been, of course the horse. Now, no woman wants to be a horse, but every woman is looking for a husband who's a rider. A husband who has destination, who has a vision, who knows what he wants and knows how to take care of his horse. They'll have the kids, they'll do the laundry, they'll take care of the cooking and the cleaning. Sure, no problem. They'll have the babies. But with that is a responsibility to make sure that all of my needs, eat, drink, sleep, run around, procreate, whatever those needs are, you take care of me. Because if you get the usage of the horse, together with that comes a responsibility to take care of the horse's needs. And this is someplace where many, many in the life that I've known, possibly including myself, have failed. Right away in shutdowns. See, because before she lets you ride her horse, and when we talk this language, please don't take it badly or personally until you hear how I apply this to the parenting model, which is the model that I got from Dr. Becker in Yerushalayim, who was a educational psychologist that taught us a lot of these ideas, discussed a lot of these concepts with us. And it's going to become clear why this is such an unbelievable metaphor. And it's, again, it's a metaphor. The first thing that a young wife checks when she marries her husband is, how does he deal with his horse? Does he put his horse into bed at night on time? Does he get his horse out of bed in the morning? Does he take care of his horse's personal hygiene? Does he brush his horse's teeth? Does he feed his horse properly at the right times and in the right amounts? How does he take care of his horse before I decide to allow him to ride my horse? And that's what I'm here for, says the wife. I'm here to let him ride my horse. I'll do the laundry, I'll do the cooking, I'll do the cleaning, I'll have the babies, I'll be here for him in every way possible that I possibly can in a healthy way. Right? But first I have to see how he deals with his horse. And that's why sometimes Shuna Rishona is a little rocky for some people, because if you have someone who has a vucha, he either got it right all the time, we'll talk about how that happened, and then this switch happens, or he just was struggling till then and he thought that someone thought that marriage was the fix, which it rarely, if ever, is, right? So now he is not really taking care of his horse. And he's hoping that it's okay because he's got this new horse. But new horse is not going to be so happy letting you ride on unless she first sees how you take care of yours. Okay, so that's step number one for a husband. Assuming that everything works out fine, and he figures it out, he knows exactly what he needs to do, and she sees him taking care of his horse, if it takes right away or if it takes some time. And now she's ready to let him ride the horse, and she goes and she does everything that needs to be done, and at times possibly maybe even goes out and brings parnasa, That's for a different conversation, and I'm definitely not the person to talk about that maybe. But under the circumstances where that's the model, and she goes out, she's doing so much, and all she needs now is that he, with the usage of the horse, should accept full responsibility for taking care of the horse's needs. He now needs to make sure that she has, and again, if it's with parnasa, with parnasa. If it's not with parnasa, then it's just making sure she's eating right, making sure she's getting enough sleep, taking care of her. This is now the responsibility. You're getting the usage so that you can fulfill your vision, whether it's to be a Talmid Chacham, whether it's to be a rich guy, whether it's to be an athlete or a politician or whatever it is that you want to be in life, and she's your back office and she's going to give you full support for that. Now you have to carry that responsibility of taking care of her needs. Now, we're going to break this up into tiny little pieces moving forward in weeks coming ahead. But for today, we said we're going to stick to this metaphor, so I'm going to use this metaphor as a bridge right now to go from marriage and quickly jump into parenting. And this is what we're going to talk about today. How does the horse and rider metaphor work for parenting? As follows. The child is born a riderless horse. That's what children are. They're a horse without a rider. And a horse without a rider can be very scary. Especially in a kitchen at Shabbos when you have a bunch of pots cooking and a bunch of things going on, and all of a sudden this little ferdela comes in and starts to wreak havoc, and you get angry at the horse, when in reality we know who takes a horse into a kitchen at Shabbos. Right? So the horse is a horse without a rider. Oh, I'm sorry, I had to do that. So the horse is a horse without a rider. Okay? And the job of the parent for the next 12 to 13 years, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, whether it's really 12 to 13, although at times it can be 9 to 15, but in that range of what we call bar bas mitzvah, and we're going to use that as our guide, because that's our worldview. From the time the child, so at the beginning it's just caretaking, right? A baby is born and it's cute and it brings us joy just by its existence, hopefully, and we just care for it, okay? We don't tell the baby when to, what to, how to, and then at some point we begin to feel this urge and need to begin guiding and showing and teaching and educating, and that's very important. We taka should follow that internal call, and yet many of us, we sort of turn this into the beginning of a war, which at first is very easy because we're big and they're small and we're powerful and they're weak and we can get them to do whatever we want. And yet with time, if you follow that model of war, and you'll keep winning wars for, it'll seem like forever, until all of a sudden they become teenagers, and then all of a sudden they start coming out with the big bad memories, and they start coming out with all of their behaviors, and et cetera, we're going to talk about that. Right? So the war model is obviously not a good model, although that's the model that many parents choose and many adults actually believe in. I'm here to discuss that with anybody who wants to at any time in almost any forum of respect. Okay? I would like to suggest that this is not a time of war. We're not here to fight with our children to get them to do what we think they should do, want them to do, or think that they should want to do in the first place, or they have to do, or it's their job. I say this and I'll repeat it, and I'm willing to discuss this with anyone. Children don't and shouldn't have jobs that they have to do. We'll talk in a moment about how we are going to, but it's not on the child. The onus is not on the child. The child doesn't have to go to sleep. The child doesn't have to wake up. The child doesn't have to brush his teeth. The child doesn't have to daven. The child doesn't have to go to school. The child doesn't have to be any place on time. The child doesn't have to be anywhere at any time. It's our job as adults in the child's life to create that, to figure out how to achieve that. That's our job. And for this job, Dr. Becker described it as being a virtual rider for the horse. So we have this baby little horse, right? So at first we just care for it, and we don't have to tell it what to do, and it just does what it wants, and cries when it wants, and eats when it begs, and sleeps when it falls asleep, and everything, life is good. And then all of a sudden, at some point, we feel this need to actually begin the guiding process, and the process, the vehicle, the way, the metaphor that Dr. Becker taught us was that the parent as a virtual rider. Now this is very important, the word virtual. Tati Mami, this is not your horse. You have your own horse. Right? You have your own horse, you have your other horse. If you're a boss, you have horses, right, that work for you, so to say. And again, it's just a metaphor, not God forbid to call any human being a horse, just to understand the relationship between ourselves and to be able to use it for this model. This is not your horse. There is a rider who has not yet arrived, who is going to arrive at 12 or 13 years, depending on boys or girls, bar bas mitzvah. And at that time, it's going to be your job to hand the reins of this little horse to this young rider. And this little horse has to be broken in, so to say. Take those rungs the word away, we're not breaking anything, right? But broken in, again, is part of the metaphor of the virtual rider. And the virtual rider has to put the horse into bed at night, and has to take the horse out of bed in the morning, and has to tell the horse to brush its teeth, or get the horse to brush its teeth. This is the job of the virtual rider on the horse. This is the job of the parent in the life of the horse. Yet it will backfire if the horse ever gets a feeling that you're beginning to use it as your horse. Most of the time when we refer to children as being mechitzufim, they're really not. They're just getting a feeling that there's an adult in their lives who's using their horse as their own, instead of being a virtual rider who's preparing the horse for the eventuality, Hashem, of the arrival of its own rider. It's waiting, it's anticipating the arrival of its rider, and it's allowing the virtual rider to train it until its rider arrives. But the moment it gets a feeling that the virtual rider is using it as its own horse, something's going to backfire. And that backfire might happen right now, in real time, or it may be stored in the memory of this virtual rider horse, exactly however you want to explain it from a scientific perspective, but just using the metaphor, that's going to pop up when the rider shows up, and the horse and the rider communicate that, hey, this is what happened way back then, and we're looking for trouble in the future. Okay, any questions, by the way, feel free to type them in, or I'm not sure if you have a voice or if you can speak here or not. But if you have anything you want to ask, feel free to reach out and ask. If you agree, if you disagree, if you want to agree, or if you'd rather not agree, either way it's fine. I'm always willing to listen to what other people have to say about what I'm saying, in spite of the fact that I really believe that what I'm saying is true. Okay, so if you have any questions, because I want to take this to the next level. And as we said, we will be talking deeper and more detail moving forward in the coming weeks. We will also save some of it for those of you who sign up for mastermind workshops, so that we can sit around and hack the details. But for now, let's just take it one notch up. Okay? So virtual riders' parents virtually rode the horse until the rider showed up. And we make a big celebration, right? For the boys, we call it a bar mitzvah. For the girls, we call it a bas mitzvah. This is at 13, this is at 12. And now, from this moment on, according to Dr. Becker, we are no longer, ever, to ride anyone else's horse. That's not what we're here for. We're here to only ride our own horse. Which means, I think something is flickering. I think it might stare. You want to pull it out, turn it off, or you want to... Whatever you decide. Sorry about that, just a little technical something. If anyone has an issue with the lights or anything, let us know. Okay, so basically what happens is as follows. What basically happens is very simple. At bar bas mitzvah, Tati Mami, Mechanchim, you got to get off the horse. Step number one. You're dealing now with a bar bas mitzvah. They're not a child anymore. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this ma'avar, this change in personality can happen at any time between 9 and 15, sometimes as late as 16 even. Okay, now obviously there's even younger mature and there's even older that are immature, but the window is usually between 9 and 15. Chazal chose 12 for the girls, 13 for the boys, because that's the average. Okay, anyone who wants to discuss the Talmudic and halachic parameters of what we're discussing and when and where, feel free to get high. We can do that at any time. But for right now, for practical purposes and following the metaphor of the horse and the rider, in the parenting metaphor, in the parenting perspective, and an educational perspective, here's something that we need to know. The moment that the rider shows up, we need to hand him or her the reins to the horse. And from the moment that they sit on the horse, no one else is ever allowed on that horse. From now, we need to talk to the rider. And I know that that's painful for some of us to even think of. And like I said, it doesn't have to be that at 13, at that moment, that's when it actually magically happened. Keep your eye out for your own child or whoever we're talking about, and if you need the help of a professional, discuss it with them. But once the rider arrives, once that maturity lands, from that moment, we need to start talking to the rider and no longer sit on the horse, because here's what happens. And this is something we see all the time. Let's say this parent, mechanech, educator, tough guy, right? And he gets on the horse and he stays on the horse. And he sits there. He doesn't use the horse chashon for his own needs. That would be terrible. But he stays virtual rider. The first thing that's going to happen is that the young rider is going to look and say, huh? What you doing on my horse? And the mechanech, the parent, whoever's going to say, what do you mean? You're too small to be trusted driving a horse like this. This is a wild horse. I've known this horse for a while, or I know horses like this, and the horses like this need extra special care, and or for whatever reason I feel as the parent that I know it better than you, and I'm gonna. And the rider isn't taking any of this. The rider, this little rider, tiny little guy, can hardly control his own horse, and he's going to say, he or she is going to say, get off my horse. Get off my horse, you don't belong here. Now, if the mechanech stays and really tries to hanker on and make sure that straddles himself in and ties himself down, at some point the little rider might even start trying to push him off the horse. Okay, this is what we call teenage chutzpah. There was childhood chutzpah when the horse realizes that the parent or the educator is is using its horse as if it would be theirs and not virtually. And this is teenage chutzpah, is when the teenager is trying to get you off their horse. They don't want to not do what you say. They don't want to not be they don't want to not do the right thing. They just first get off my horse. And very often you have this very strong or powerful or strong-minded mechanech, whether it's a parent or an educator, and says, no, I'm not getting off the horse, and now you're going to do this, and you're going to do that, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do that, and guess what happens? What happens is that at some point, this little rider says, okay, you know what? You're stronger than me. And he just goes like this. He just sits on his horse while you do right and left and stand up and now learn and now daven, now gartel, now go to bed, now mikveh, now brush your teeth, now whatever it is you get him to do, no problem. But guess what? At some point the educator is going to have to go to the bathroom. He's going to have to go home to his family. He's going to have to go to work. He's going to have to go do something else. And the second that happens and he's not riding his horse, this tiny little rider who has not gained any experience in controlling his horse and guiding his horse and making decisions with his horse, taking care of his horse, all of a sudden now the horse says, hey, no one riding. What does a horse do? Eats, drinks, runs around, right? Sleeps and procreates. That's it. And now you have this tiny little rider hanging onto the tail of his horse, and he's like, whoa, I don't even know how to deal with this horse. And then all of a sudden the mechanech comes back and sits down, and then the rider goes, okay, I don't know what to do. And the horse just does whatever the mechanech says. What's happening here is that the young rider is not gaining the experience, the control, the skills to deal with the horse. It's not setting destinations. It's not learning how to care for the horse. And that, in my humble opinion, is detrimental to the abilities and capacities of this young rider to be able to become a healthy rider that's going to use his or her horse to arrive at their destinations, and definitely not learn how to take care of the horse in a healthy way. Go ahead, tell me if you agree. I'd love to see it. Exactly. Yeah. Right? 100%. Okay. So now, let's understand one tiny little thing that we're going to take out of all this, and we will leave the rest of it for the coming weeks. All right? Every one of us is born with the Yetzer Hara. Okay, great. At some point, we get what we refer to as the Yetzer Tov. And again, these are topics that we're going to go deeper and deeper into. All right? But let's unpack them slowly so that we can actually experience the knowledge of these things as we move forward, and pack them and stack them the right way, in a way that actually leads us to action and activity and results, and not just knowledge. We're all born with the Yetzer Hara. And then at the Bar Bas Mitzvah, the Yetzer Tov shows up. Now, how many people do we know? I mean, I can only talk for myself, that when a parent or a mechanech or even a mentor or a friend takes on the role of the Yetzer Tov, and makes sure that the chonech, that the child or the student or the mentoree, and make sure they do everything right. We wake them up in the morning, and we make sure they go to sleep at night, and we make sure they do the right. We take care. We make sure we're the ones who make sure. What ends up happening is that in the relationship between us and them, we now represent the Yetzer Tov, and they are now stuck being the Yetzer Hara. And guess what? They're not growing their Yetzer Tov, because they're leaving that to us. Which, as long as we're around, may or may not work. Yet at some point we're going somewhere. Either they're moving on or we're moving on, and that's only for good, but at some point we're not going to be there 24/7. So yes, there will be Diuknoi, and there will be the memory of the words being said, but if we are the Yetzer Tov, instead of helping them grow their own Yetzer Tov, then when we're no longer there, or they're no longer with us, all they're stuck with is their Yetzer Hara, mature Yetzer Hara, and they're stunted. It's time. Stunted growth. Doesn't have capacity, doesn't have ability, doesn't know how to deal with things. So our goal, our job as mechanchim, as parents, is not to replace the Yetzer Tov. When they're children, we are their virtual rider. We guide them. We will talk about this, what chinuch means, how they're watching us more than they're listening to us, and how if we get them to do things that we're doing, it's much easier than to get them to do the things that we wish we were doing, or we know we should be doing, or we're not doing. And we'll talk about that, Amir Hashem, but for right now, we're just getting a general vision of this relationship, which when we were small, we were these riderless horses, and then we finally at some point got a rider. We received a rider, and we've been struggling in our relationship between the horse and the rider for ages, and then we got married, and the horse and rider relationship may or may not be struggling for ages, and now we have children, and we have all these new horses that need virtual riders. How will we deliver that service that is expected and necessary of us as parents and mechanchim for our children, while doing it in such a way where we don't break those young horses, where we don't use those young horses for our own personal needs, chas v'shalom, even though it seems like it's the most natural thing, and al pi Torah there is room for it, and even in the relationship there's room for it, as long as you're clear about it. You can take an occasional ride on your child's horse, bring me my slippers or whatnot, and you don't really mean their chinuch, and you're not really meaning it to virtually ride them, and get away with it under the proper circumstances. As Dr. Becker used to say, that in our relationship with our children, we're constantly making deposits and withdrawals, and as long as your withdrawals are covered by deposits, it'll be fine. The issues begin when we begin to withdraw more than we deposited, and that's when things start crashing, and we got to be careful. Okay? So wishing you all an amazing ride, hoping for all of you that you've taken out of the last almost hour as much as I have, and enjoyed it as much as I have, and moving forward, focus on yourselves, your past, and especially others and your future, and just ask yourself, in every situation, who's the horse, who's the rider, and how is that interaction working for me or against me? And as long as it's working for you and for others, now and in the future, don't change a thing. But if there's anything that's not working, instead of blaming, complaining, and ending up with excuses, come back next Tuesday at 4 or sign up for one of our other products, and we will keep this conversation going. That's a shot.